It certainly sounds like responses I would have provided, but I have to say honestly that I don't remember.
Okay. I'm going to point your attention to a particular part of this interview, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. May I approach?
What pages? 5 and 6 of our transcript and of yours.
Are you asking me to read?
I'm just asking you to read this right now, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Okay.
So just read through here.
And where do you want me to start?
To yourself.
Okay.
Oh, yes, sorry, to yourself.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'll start you here. Have you read.
What's up? All right, we need to slip in a commercial break as he shows the witness that. We're approaching the top of the hour. My time is up.
Good afternoon, Ted. We'll hold down the fort here. We have a lot more coverage ahead, more testimony from the defense in the case. The trial over that movie set armorer, Hannah Gutierrez. Don't go anywhere. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julia Janae. Thanks so much for following along with us this afternoon. We're watching the case against armorer Hannah Gutierrez. It's winding down in New Mexico this afternoon. The then 24-year-old armorer is accused of failing to follow basic safety procedures while working on the set of the Western film Rust. Prosecutors say her negligence is how a live bullet ended up in a prop gun that was used by actor Alec Baldwin to carry out that fatal shooting that left cinematographer Helena Hutchins dead. We're also in Tennessee this afternoon as well. For the mother-daughter murder trial, prosecutors say the defendant there, Robin Howington, fatally shot her 5-year-old daughter and then attempted to hide the weapon and destroy her phone. But the defense paints a much more sympathetic story, saying that Howington was suffering from PTSD and was in a fragile state of mind when she was speaking with investigators, and they say she accidentally shot her daughter. We'll take you into that courtroom later this afternoon, but let's start in New Mexico. We're picking up where we left off. The defense's second witness is on the stand. This is Robert Genoway. He's the bureau chief for OSHA there in New Mexico. Let's go back in.
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Genoway, do you agree with me that during this interview, you agreed that Ms. Gutierrez, her actions contributed to the breakdown that occurred on this set?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to ask you a couple questions about the investigatory materials that you reviewed. You already indicated you do not have a copy of the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office report, correct?
I'm not sure whether we obtained one after issuing our citations.
And to be clear, I'm talking about as OS or OHSB conducted its investigation and issued its findings, you did not have the benefit of the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office investigatory report to assist you with that, correct?
Correct.
All right. And did you have the benefit of reviewing any behind-the-scenes videos that were filmed on the set of Rust?
Not that I can recall.
Do you recall if you reviewed any footage from the filming of the Rust movie cameras?
No.
Did you engage the assistance of any expert armorers for your purposes of your investigation?
We didn't engage your contract. We had some brief discussions with potential experts, but we never actually engaged those experts.
You never relied on any of their opinions to inform your investigation?
No.
Okay. I know that you were asked some questions about determining fines against employers. Is it fair to say that OSHA's purview is not to assess fines against individual employees?
That's correct.
So is it also fair to say then that even if you found that there had been some concerning conduct by an employee, you wouldn't have fined that employee, correct?
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect.
But would you have said in your report that a specific employee failed to do something if that's what you determined?
In most cases, no.
Now, did Rust afford, in this case, the armor with sufficient time to thoroughly inventory the ammunition?
Objection.
All right, we've got a quick sidebar there. We've been seeing a few of those there inside of the courtroom as this OSHA bureau chief is testifying. We saw this from the previous OSHA safety inspector who testified that Hannah Gutierrez was not who they found to be responsible, not who they fined. But the state has brought out that OSHA doesn't look for employees to fine them. They look at the workplace standards, and that's going to fall to the management, the people in control of that workplace. Sounds like that sidebar is broken up. Let's go back in.
To ask you with respect to the Bureau's finding, did the Bureau, the OSHB Bureau, find that Rust failed to afford the armor with time to thoroughly inventory the ammunition?
I don't know if I recall that specifically. What I do recall is that our investigation determined that, from my recollection, more in general, that sufficient time for armor.
Would it
armor
refresh your
duties.
memory to look at the report?
Yes.
Page 7. Said he didn't remember.
I'm going to object to that.
Billy said he didn't remember. I'm going to refresh his memory. He said it would help him. Do you remember the exact wording of the specific finding in the report pertaining to affording the armor time on inventory of ammunition?
No.
Would it refresh your memory to look at the report?
Yes.
Okay, page 7. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes. Does that refresh your memory?
Yes.
Did OSHB find that Rust failed to afford the armor time to thoroughly inventory the ammunition?
Yes.
Did Rust find that, did OSHB find that Rust did not provide the armor with the authority to determine if additional training was required in violation of Rust safety procedures?
I recall that the investigation found that sufficient time wasn't provided by Rust.
It was not provided, is that what you said?
Sufficient time was not provided by Rust.
Okay, so, and were there also findings by OSHB that despite efforts by employees that Rust ignored some of the safety concerns?
Objection.
What was your understanding of the Rust findings with respect to whether safety concerns were that were brought to Rust's attention were addressed correctly?
Right. Our investigation found that Rust failed to adequately review safety oversights on the set and so that they could take necessary action to prevent recurrence.
So when you're asked on cross about a statement you gave in some pretrial interview about Ms. Gutierrez contributing to a breakdown on the set, why is it that you believe that's possible?
Well, what we would look for in an investigation is whether acts on the part of employees are preventable on the part of an employer. That's part of a determination of what we call the employer knowledge aspect of a violation. So that's why we would look at that type of information.
Okay, and in this case, did you determine whether the breakdowns from Gutierrez were due to any act of the employer?
Yes, we determined that those breakdowns were caused by failures of the employer to adequately oversee safety.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, sir, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next witness.
While they work on getting together that next witness, witness number 3 for the defense, let's bring in our guest for this hour. Trial attorney Michael Jaafar is standing by. Michael, it's good to see you. OSHA on the stand today. This is not something we typically see in a criminal trial, is it not? OSHA regulations and guidelines and reports, it's often in a civil case or a workers' compensation case.
Completely agree, right? So the defense attorney, their job is to send the jury back into the box with one overwhelming feeling, and that's doubt, right? So how do you do it? It's going to be very difficult to do when you are tasked as the armorer on a case when the armor misfired and murdered a person, right? So it's going to be very difficult to do. So you're going to grasp for everything. And I would have never thought of this, but yeah, if you can bring in an official government agency that sits in front of the jury and tells the jury and confuses the jury, not intentionally confusing the jury, but it will confuse the jury because an official government agency is going to say, hey, you know what? The negligence was not here. It was in the leadership, right? It wasn't on this one person. If that could happen, right, then you've done your job as a defense attorney because you've created doubt, right? Because the burden of proof, Julia, here is very, very low. It's just negligence, right? It doesn't even, it's recklessness or negligence, but negligence is a very easy burden to meet. You know, when somebody dies, right? If somebody breaks their knee, it's more difficult to overcome negligence. But when somebody dies, it's very easy to overcome negligence. So I think this move by the defense, I think, is a great move.
Yeah, we'll see who they bring next. They've already brought in 2 people who worked in OSHA, worked for the New Mexico Bureau of OSHA, and now we're going to see who they're going to bring next to continue their theme in front of this jury that Hannah Gutierrez was a scapegoat and not the one responsible for Helena Hutchins' death. Let's squeeze in a break. We'll get you back in for witness number 3 after this. Welcome back. Let's go back to New Mexico for the Baldwin movie shooting trial. Hannah Gutierrez is charged with involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence in connection to the fatal 2021 Rust movie shooting. On the stand is a defense witness. They've called their 3rd witness. It's a private investigator and former homicide detective hired by the defense to be their investigator, Scott Elliott. Let's go in.
Scott Elliott.
Mr. Elliott, what do you do for a living currently?
I'm currently a private investigator.
And Mr. Elliott, prior to becoming a private investigator, did you have a career in law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the jury what your career was in law enforcement, how many years?
Military and civilian, or just?
Let's start with civilian and we'll work back.
Okay. I was hired by the Albuquerque Police Department, and I attended the academy starting in February of 1993. I retired in 2011. During that time period, I started out field services, normal uniform patrol. I went to the gang unit. Then I became a violent crimes detective in about 1995-96. And in 1998, I became a homicide detective. And I was a homicide detective when I retired in 2011.
So, sir, you spent approximately, it sounds like 13 years in homicide division?
Part of that was interrupted by post 9/11 deployment, but yes.
Like post 9/11, did you deploy overseas?
I did.
And was that part of your, we'll get into your military, part of your military duties?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Sir, how many, as part of your homicide portion of your APD employment, approximately how many investigations do you think you worked on in homicide?
As a case agent, 35 or 40, assisting on homicides, 150, 200.
And this is just homicides. You probably had 150, 200. In terms of violent crime or other types of narcotics or any types of, how many investigations do you think you've handled in the course of your police career? Do you even have an estimate?
I don't think so. I became a detective in 1995. Hundreds of cases a year. And then by the time I was in violent crimes, it was slightly reduced, but that was all violent crime short of homicide. So lots of those.
And you also talked about your military service. Can you tell the jury briefly about whether you had law enforcement type experience with the military?
Yes, I was commissioned in 1981 in the infantry. I spent approximately 10 years on active duty, various duties was part of the active duty time. And then I left the service in active duty in 1992. In 1993, started with the police department. Then I transferred into the reserves. In Albuquerque, there was not an infantry unit anywhere nearby. So I was an engineer officer for a little while, and then I became a secondary specialty of military policeman. And I worked in those functions until I transferred from the Army in 2003 to the Air Force. When I transferred to the Air Force, I took command of what's called a heavy weapons squadron, which was a security forces unit, which is Air Force Police. The difference with that unit is that they had weapon systems that are normally found in the Army. Mortars, snipers, grenade launchers, things like that. So my prior Army career folded right into that unit and its mission.
So, sir, you've conducted investigations both civilian and military environments. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, and Your Honor, at this time I tender Mr. Elliott as an expert in quality of investigations, law enforcement investigations.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what was, I didn't understand the first thing you said, Mr. Paulson.
Oh, sure, the quality of law enforcement investigations.
No objection.
All right, he's an expert as described.
Mr. Elliott, can you tell the jury specifically what did you do in this particular case? Just an overview scope.
Well, I reviewed all the discovery, all the reports, videos, any documentation, any evidence. That included going in physically looking at the evidence in this case. In addition to that, I interviewed the majority of the state's witnesses in what's called pretrial interviews. I think the only ones I didn't interview were the FBI employees.
Do you recall ballpark how many interviews you conducted in this case, just an approximate?
35, 40 maybe.
And in terms of the reports, did you review voluminous reports in this case as well?
Yes, I did.
And have you, as an expert, also made some conclusions based on your review of the materials, your interviews, and what you've seen in this case?
I did.
Okay. I don't want to hit every point that you might make, but I want to hit some of the major ones. First of all, at the scene, at the initial scene when law enforcement responds, can you tell the jury, do you have any conclusions about the quality of the investigation by the sheriffs at the scene?
Yeah, some of that was reached by my own observations and some of it through interviews of the deputies on the scene. I felt like their response was probably not what it should be. There were hundreds of people on that ranch, but if you narrow it down to who was in the church at the time of the shooting and who may have had involvement with the case, for example, the people that were just outside, there was really about 20 people. The first responding deputies, their job is first preservation of life, and then it is preservation of evidence and identifying witnesses and possible suspects. In this case, it was known very quickly who the shooter was, but it wasn't known who the witnesses were. And those witnesses, once they were identified, they should have been segregated so they couldn't talk among themselves.
Now, let me stop you right there. When you initially, as a law enforcement homicide detective or somebody going on scene, you identify the shooter, what in your opinion is one of the first things that you should do?
Well, the first thing you do is put someone with that individual, segregate them from everyone else. You also want to, those individuals, since you are preserving evidence, you also want to secure their cell phones.
Now, in this case, in the materials you reviewed, did it appear to you that Mr. Baldwin was segregated?
Not at all.
And along with the conclusion you just stated, did it appear that his cell phone was taken from him?
No, it was not.
Mr. Elliott, did it appear to you that at any time at the scene that day, Mr. Baldwin was segregated?
He was not.
Okay. Next, you talked about identifying key witnesses and preserving evidence. Can you explain that a little more?
Yes. Well, the scene was secured. You don't often have a scene of that small of an environment. It was known immediately that the shooting occurred inside that church structure and that it probably involved a couple of people just outside near that weapons cart. So that was the immediate concern, that area there. And the deputies, one of the early responding deputies did get a pretty good list of who was in the church and gave that to the lieutenant. But those individuals were not segregated from everybody else. They were able to mingle with people who were not on scene, who were in a different part of the ranch. Conversations were taking place. People were talking on cell phones. And it's really unknown who they were talking to.
And what is the danger or what is the concern on the part of an investigator when suspects or witnesses are talking?
Well, a couple things. One, people could be getting their story straight. The other is, it causes witnesses to misremember what they did and what they saw. Because in my experience, good, honest citizens try to help. And they'll tell you something that their neighbor told them as if it was something that they saw. And it is just human nature that if you talk about something over and over and over again, eventually there are parts of it that you think that you did, and it was what someone else did. So you want to clean, even if it's very brief and they didn't see very much or they didn't hear very much, you want a clean statement of what their knowledge is.
Okay, and with regard to whether, if that is not done, what can that lead to? What is your conclusion about what can happen if people are not?
All right, we have to squeeze in a break. The private investigator there questioning how the police investigation of this fatal shooting on a movie set was handled. We'll have more from that investigator on the other side. Stay with us. Our Court TV teams are in 2 courtrooms this afternoon. We'll get you back into the Baldwin movie shooting trial in Santa Fe, New Mexico in just a moment. But first, an update on the other trial that we are covering. Robin Howington is accused of shooting her 5-year-old daughter, Destiny, in the chest back in 2019. Court documents say she has told authorities several versions of what happened, even blaming the shooting on the father of her child. Today in court, one witness described meeting Howington in the bathroom of a hospital.
I went in to use the restroom. There was probably maybe 3 stalls, and it was empty. There was no one in there, and I went into the last one. And then I had heard somebody come in, and they come and stood at my door, and I just thought that was a little weird.
Okay. What happened next?
I opened the door to come out, and she's standing there, has the phone in her hand, and tries to get me to take it. She's like, "Please take my phone." And I questioned it, and she said a man had come into her house and shot her daughter, and the cops are going to take her phone, and she needed me to just throw it away somewhere for her.
Did she give you any other reasons why she wanted to get rid of that phone?
She had said something that she sold drugs, and just that the cops were going to take her phone.
Ultimately, the woman did not take the phone. Another witness testified about buying drugs from Howington and what she asked him to do.
And she says, "Go to my house the back way and get my gun out of the bush under the air conditioner. Gavin shot Destiny, then come to UT, and I got you for free." Do you recall receiving that text message from Miss Howington at around 9:26 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. When she indicated to go to her house the back way, did you know what that meant?
I assume like in the alleyway.
Okay. And are you familiar with where her air conditioning is and where her bush is that she was referencing?
Not really.
Okay. When you received this text message asking you to go get her gun out of the bush, what was going through your mind?
I didn't want no part in it.
And then the next text message says the police are there, but if you park in the alley and walk up, you're good because they're in the house. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so, again, when you receive this second text message, what's going through your mind, Mr. Key?
I'm not doing none of this.
Now, the defense explains away those changes in story and soliciting people as parts of the defendant's PTSD. We're going to pass along any updates on the mother-daughter murder trial throughout the day here on Court TV. But for now, we want to get you back into coverage for the Rust movie set shooting involving Hannah Gutierrez. She is accused of loading a fully functioning revolver with a live round, and then ultimately that gun being handed over to Alec Baldwin, causing the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Right now, the jury is hearing from a private investigator hired by the defense, Scott Elliott. He is facing direct examination by the defense. Let's go in.
Well, one, you can delete things off your phone. You can delete photos. It wasn't known at the time if somebody was videotaping what was going on inside on their phone. That's possible. Almost every case you work now, someone has videotaped it with their phone.
Did you also determine, and this is another point, but that someone had left the scene and whether that person had been identified?
As far as I know, they still have not been identified.
With regard to securing the prop card on that scene, what is your opinion as to whether that was appropriately handled?
No, it should have remained in place. There was an individual, Brian, was told to go get the cart. He went out of sight behind the church, on the other side of the church, and then he moved the cart around towards the lieutenant's marked unit. That should not have been done.
As well, what is your opinion as to or do you have any concerns about how the evidence on top of the prop cart was handled?
Well, Lieutenant Benavides took possession of the firearm with an ungloved hand, and he grabbed it right around the cylinder. So the largest portion of the revolver is how he picked up the revolver, put it into his vehicle, at another occasion pulled it out of his vehicle and put it back on the cart. He did the same thing with the ammo boxes from the cart. So you definitely can't preserve evidence by touching things with your bare hands, but it also could have damaged anything that was on the boxes or the firearm prior to him handling it.
Now, working our way through this, and you may be aware that there was evidence there were rounds thrown away in the course of your investigation. Do you have any concerns at this point with how the police responded to that? The sheriffs responded to that matter?
Well, it's my understanding that they were notified quite late. I think it was a month later. But I didn't see any attempt to go out and see if they were still in the trash at the ranch.
And is that something in your normal investigation, when you were doing homicide investigations, you want to collect all of the potential evidence?
Well, in this case, there's a couple things. The law enforcement was told almost immediately, this was the firearm used. But the projectile can't be matched to a firearm. And I know there were at least 3 .45 long Colt revolvers on that cart that day. So although the casing has been tested to match the firearm that was presented to law enforcement, there's no way to know that projectile positively came from that firearm.
Along with the rounds that were thrown away, did you have any other concerns on the follow-up with regard to identifying the source of that live round or live rounds that appeared on set?
That didn't seem to be followed up on very strongly. It's a little confusing when rounds came onto the set or the scene, the ranch, and who brought them. It seemed that there were a number of times that, at least one occasion, I thought it was more, that Sarah went to PDQ in Albuquerque and brought ammo back. There was the initial ammo provided by PDQ, and then there was some ammo provided by Ms. Gutierrez.
Let's hit the pause button and bring in trial attorney Michael Jaafar, who is standing by. Michael, this is a different kind of witness. We talked about how OSHA was a government, unbiased witness on the stand for the defense. You've got someone here who's paid to talk about now another aim at the target of blame for the defense, which is the police not doing enough in the investigation. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you that that's what he's doing. I don't know how impactful that's going to be. I mean, the OSHA witness is, in my opinion, going to be a lot more impactful. Somebody was negligent here, right? The victim didn't die because, a ceiling tile broke off and hit her in the head and killed her. Somebody had a duty of care and they failed in that duty. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the way that investigation was done. I can see why they need to do that, but at the end of the day, the jury are going to be looking at the defendant here, and they're going to be asking themselves one question, and the jury instruction is going to be, Did you believe that she was negligent in her duty? First, do you believe she had a duty? I think everybody would agree she had a duty. She was the armorer. The question is whether or not she failed in her duty, right? And how the investigation was handled, in my opinion, is on the lowest tier of evidence that could be brought to her defense. I think the biggest thing is going to be who else might have intervened in her prosecution of her duty that might have broken the fact that she did a great job. You could be a doctor and sew up a patient really well, and then after you sew up the patient, a nurse comes in after you're done and you leave the room and then stabs the patient. That could happen, and then you were not negligent as a doctor. But if while the patient was open and you had a duty and you left the scalpel inside the patient, that's negligence. So that's basically the crux of this case is, did you do your job and did you perform your duty? And if you didn't perform your duty, did somebody else cause it to happen? And that's why I don't know if this private investigator is going to be a big witness.
And that's what we're looking for from the defense. Are they going to be able to bring in someone to say, in your scenario, a nurse came in after the fact and did some misdeed? We will see if they are able to point it that clearly with these witnesses. Stand by, Michael. We have to squeeze in a break. We'll get you back inside of that courtroom in New Mexico in just a moment.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, breaking down key...
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We are following several courtrooms across the country today. Before we get you back into New Mexico, let's get a quick update out of Michigan. Jury selection officially underway in the trial against James Crumbly. He's the father who faces 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter in connection with the 2021 deadly shooting carried out by his son, Ethan. A jury found Ethan's mother, Jennifer, James's wife, guilty of the same charges last month. He has a new jury, a new trial separate from his wife. It's going to be up to them to decide if he is equally responsible. Opening statements are expected to begin on Wednesday once that jury is seated. Court TV will be there for all of it. Let's get you back, though, into the trial for Hannah Gutierrez, a defense witness, a defense private investigator is on the stand now testifying about the failings he says happened with the police investigation on that movie set.
Should have been taken to try to further look into the source of the live rounds?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the white boxes with the JS. That individual has never been interviewed, the producer of the ammunition. So there really was no backtracking of where the ammo came from. You can't say this ammo on the prop cart definitively where it came from. You can't say the ammunition in the prop truck definitively where it came from. There should have been more work done in that area.
And when you're in a situation like this as a former homicide detective, when you're trying to trace the root cause of tragic situation that's occurred, is that something that would be important to you to find out where the live round originated from?
Yes, this case is also a little unusual in the sense that it wasn't really a who done it. It was a why done it and how done it. By that I mean, you don't know anybody there. You go out as an investigator, you're trying to find out what happened. Was there an argument on set? Was somebody angry? Did somebody have a mental break? Is there some underlying relationship that may have been the root cause of the shooting? You don't know. And that's why an investigation is conducted, to find out those things, and it's also to trace how that firearm came to be where it came to be.
Okay, sir, and with regard to the search of the prop truck that occurred after the 21st, on the 27th, did you have any concerns with the delay in that search warrant?
Oh, absolutely. There were firearms missing from the weapons cart. They had been moved from between the shooting and the arrival of law enforcement, and they were moved into the safe, into the prop truck. That should have been part of an expanding scene. Like I said, you had the church and the area immediately outside of it. But as soon as it became known the prop truck had an involvement with that shooting, the prop truck should have been secured, just like you saw the scene, crime scene tape, deputy placed there, nobody allowed in the truck until such time as you can do a search warrant.
In addition, with regard to the search warrant of Seth Kenny's business, PDQ Props, did you have any concerns about the delay of approximately a month in searching that business?
Oh, of course. A delay of a few days could be an issue, but a month is, you could do anything in a month.
And from your review of records in this case, was it ascertainable that Mr. Kenny was one of the suppliers of ammunition to Rust?
I think it was known almost immediately, both by the people at the scene and Mr. Kenny himself.
With respect to that delay in search warrant, there's some obvious things I think that would be apparent to anybody. But why is that an issue? What are the primary issues that you want to do to try to secure a home and search it right away, secure a business, search it right away? What are the reasons?
Well, it's preservation of evidence. If no one can get inside the business, then no one can tamper with anything that's inside. And you hope to get everything as it was as soon as you can, without any type of alteration.
With regard to Mr. Kenny, did you also have any concerns about collection of DNA, fingerprints, things like that?
I did. Those things can be used for elimination or positively identifying someone. In the case of Mr. Kenny, if they had his major case prints and they had his DNA, and none of it was found on the boxes of ammunition, then it would eliminate him as somebody possibly being involved.
In your opinion, and your experience as an investigator, would this have been something that you would expect to have been done? That the supplier of ammunition to Rust, that he would also be looked at in that respect?
Yes, considering the environment and the fact that there should not have been live rounds on set.
Now, with regard to Mr. Kenny, did you also determine whether his phone had been seized to be extracted or whether that had been fully extracted?
It was not. His phone was never.
What is your opinion on that potential or that fact that his phone was never taken for extraction?
The contact between Sarah Zachary and he almost immediately after the shooting warranted that.
And are you speaking about the phone call right after the shooting where we heard testimony and there was a text emergency? Is that the time frame you're talking about?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And are you also aware that there were a number of calls that Seth Kenny, other calls that he was making in contact with Sarah Zachary?
Dozens of calls.
In your opinion, to do a complete investigation, to get the facts out, to get the truth?
We are reaching the top of the hour, so we do have to step aside to fit in a break. Let's bring back in National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar, who is standing by. Michael, we keep hearing the names Seth Kenny and Sarah Zachary. The defense wants you to think about anybody else except for Hannah Gutierrez. Will it work?
I think, they're going down the right path. They're troubled by the fact that their client was considered the armorer on the case. So I think everything they do now, this is a good trial team, right? The defense team, and everything they go down this path, they do going down this path is to try to break every single nexus and connection she has with being the sole person responsible. She's the person sitting without a chair. She's on an island. They're trying to get her off that island by saying, look, there were other people, there were intervening factors and intervening people who also could have had a hand in this. It's not just our client. So they have to do it. It might work, Julia. I just don't know.
You mentioned it's not as hard a hurdle to get over when it comes to negligence and someone dying. So as much as they can, they want to make that hurdle higher and higher for these jurors. National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar, thank you so much for joining us this hour and lending your expertise. My time is up here at the desk. This trial is continuing on, and Matt Johnson is here to pick up that coverage. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Julia, coming up, we're going to have the remainder of that private investigator's testimony, plus a live report from our own Kelly Craft. We're going to be right back. You're watching Court TV, your front row seat to justice.